Good morning and welcome to this webinar, and thank you for joining us this morning so early. I hope you had your coffee and you can now relax and listen for just 1 hour for this webinar so that you guys can learn and understand how we can save our planet even more. So this webinar is being organized by the European Commission representation in Malta, together with the Malta Business Bureau in collaboration with the Malta Independent and the Enterprise Europe Network. The subject that we're going to discuss in the coming hours relates to climate neutrality vis-à-vis energy and transportation, and how the EU is going to help its member states, including Malta, to have cleaner energy. The speakers that will be participating are Diederik Samson, Head of Cabinet of the European Commission Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans, Prof. Simon Borch, Head of Department of Environmental and Resources Law at the University of Malta, Patrick Spiteri-Staines, Chairperson Energy Efficiency and Conservation Committee at the Malta Chamber of Commerce. And also, before we start, I would also like you to know that this webinar is going to be broadcasted live on our website, the Malta Independent website, as well as its Facebook page. It is important to highlight that for you participants to join and to participate during this webinar, there are 2 ways how to do it. You can either write your question in the Q&A section in the Zoom. There is a section called Q&A where you can leave your question there, and then I will read the question and the speakers will answer your question, or else by raising your hand, and like that we would know that you would like to say the question yourself or you want to pass the comment yourself. In both cases, I would appreciate if you identify yourselves. Now, before we actually go straight to the discussion, I would like to invite Dr. Elena Grech, Head of the European Commission representation in Malta, to say a few words. Dr. Grech.
Good morning, Rachel. Thank you very much for your kind words of introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, followers on Facebook, on the website, online. It's a pleasure for us as European Commission representation, together with the Malta Business Bureau and the Malta Independent, to host this very topical discussion on how to achieve climate neutrality. Now, the European Commission has long busied itself with legislation in order to limit the damage to climate, because we hear much more about climate change now, but this is definitely not a new phenomenon. It has been around for many years. There's been awareness about it for many years. Unfortunately, the European Commission and other international organizations, we as citizens as well, do not seem to have paid enough attention to the urgency of tackling the peril that we are generating with our day-to-day activity. And therefore, the Ursula von der Leyen, the current Commission president, upon taking up her mandate, realized that, it's time, it's now or never, basically. Even as the Glasgow COP21 conference concluded some weeks ago, that either if we don't take urgent action now, then we're really going to lose the plot and it's swim or die. The European Commission, in fact, earlier this year adopted a package called Fit for 55, which is a bit of a fancy name, if you like, but I will explain what it stands for. The ambition of this Commission is to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Carbon neutrality means that whatever we emit in our day-to-day lives by doing whatever we do, traveling, going to work, cooking, eating, emits carbon emissions into the atmosphere, which are the pollutants that are harming the atmosphere and leading to climate change. And therefore, by 2050, whatever we do has to be carbon neutral, which means that whatever we do is offset by positive action that we take. For example, if we emit grams of carbon, there are enough trees to absorb the carbon that is emitted. Obviously, the way to do that is by reducing the carbon emissions that we do emit, and at the same time taking steps to generate activity that absorbs whatever we emit. Now, the Fit for 55 package sets a midterm goal. By 2030, the European Commission is proposing that by 2030, carbon emissions are reduced by 55%. We cannot dream that between now and 2050 we go from 100 to 0, because that would just be impossible. So with the Fit for 55 package, the European Commission is proposing kind of a midway stop, a midway reality check, that by 2030 we need to have reduced our emissions by 55%. Now, that's quite a tall order, of course, but the package itself is a legislative package which redrafts, rehashes existing legislation. For example, the emissions trading scheme. It's something that has been around quite a while. For those who do not understand fully what it is, it means that every country is allocated tot number of emission trading credits, if you like, and if it needs more, it has to pay for them to get them or trade them off with other countries who do not consume all their credits. That's one of the directives that will be rehashed actually. And for example, this trading scheme will also now be, so far it had been used, it had applied mostly to for example, carbon mining or transportation or flying. Now it's extended also to shipping activities, which have become significantly a big sector of our day-to-day world. Apart from that, there's also proposals for new legislation which did not exist so far. But the most important thing is that the package aims to be socially fair, because it's not possible. I mean, we all know we're a diverse union of 27 member states at different stages of development, each of us. So if you look at the Nordic countries, Sweden and Denmark, for example, they're already far ahead of the game, and they've applied their ambition is to, even Finland, their ambition is to reach carbon neutrality well before the date set by the European Commission. But then if you look at the more industrialized countries or some of the Eastern European countries, which still depend a lot on coal for heating purposes, for example, you can't ask the same of them, because it would penalize their economic development and growth and cause social hardship as well, apart from loss of jobs. So apart from setting out this package of legislation to make sure that countries abide by them and achieve their targets, the European Commission has also come out with the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which supports the member states in achieving their climate change needs and ambitions, including Malta, of course. We know that President von der Leyen was in Malta in September. Malta has been allocated 314 million euros to be consumed, to be spent by 2026. In carrying out projects which lead to lower carbon emission and an improvement in the carbon footprint of the country. For example, modification of buildings. Heating and cooling buildings is one of the activities that actually requires a lot of power. How do we reduce that? Of course, by making buildings more insulated, by installing double glazing, for example, insulation on roofs, improving air conditioning systems in terms of the consumption that they need, and so on and so forth. I won't take more of your time. I hope that this was enough to put you in a picture of what we will be discussing today. In the meantime, I give the floor back to you, and I wish all the participants a good webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Grech, and have a good day. Now I would like to invite the CEO of the Malta Business Bureau, Mr. Joe Tanti, to say a few words. Good morning, Mr. Tanti.
Good morning. Thank you, Rachel. EU and Maltese government representatives, speakers and panelists, participants, good morning, and I welcome you all to this webinar discussing the EU and Malta's road towards carbon neutrality. Climate change action is becoming more urgent with every passing year. The threat is particularly concerning for countries like Malta, which not only suffers from insularity, but also has to contend with the difficulties of operating from the European periphery. Malta has limited natural resources at its disposal. It is heavily reliant on the importation of essential products, such as food and other basic goods. Supply disruptions abroad have an impact on prices and availability locally, as could already be felt during the worst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Climate change will not only have a negative effect on imports, but also on economic activity. Tourism is a key component of Malta's economy, contributing to almost 30% of GDP, accounting for spillover effects. Our tourism product is naturally dependent on favorable weather conditions, which is further compounded by the fact that the only means of transport to Malta are by sea or air. It is clear to understand how severe or unpredictable weather can negatively impact Maltese prosperity. The danger is real, and the international community has set the common target of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which was principally reconfirmed in COP26 and aims to avoid the worst effects of climate change. This target needs to be achieved through a drastic reduction in the amount of greenhouse gases we produce. Europe is a leader on this front, committing itself to become a carbon-neutral continent by 2050. The EU has taken a step towards this vision by first adopting the EU Green Deal in 2019 and then publishing the Fit for 55 package in 2021. As we will discuss today, the Fit for 55 is the first set of legislative proposals which outline the road to carbon neutrality in policy terms. The issues range from increasing energy efficiency to generating more renewable energy and reducing emissions in the transport sector. Maltese businesses embrace this greener future to safeguard Malta's long-term prosperity. Nonetheless, policy measures should always be designed keeping in mind the economic context they are operating in. Businesses are just starting to recover from the worst economic downturn since the 2008 financial crisis. It is critical that new or revised policy measures do not hamper business competitiveness or introduce disproportionate financial costs that will invariably be felt by companies and impact consumers. One critical example is the proposed measure to phase out tax exemptions on airline and maritime fuel in view of transitioning towards more sustainable fuel sources by 2033. Such proposals, if designed incorrectly, risk disproportionately increasing transport costs to Malta and affect our connectivity to mainland Europe and beyond. These real concerns must be considered by government and EU policymakers and properly accounted for, such as financial support. Despite these clear challenges, climate ambition presents important opportunities. The first is to supply innovative technologies to industry and transport sectors. These sectors account for over half of annual energy consumption in Malta, showing significant potential gains in terms of energy efficiency. Secondly, through better working conditions for many, that will undoubtedly transition to more digital and green jobs. Malta also needs to be more ambitious on renewable energies. Our geography naturally limits potential in this area, but R&D efforts for innovative application should continue to be explored to move beyond minimum targets. This will also help ensure the security of energy supply and decouple prices from international disruption in the supply of oil and gas. Of course, this shift towards newer technology will come at a cost, which is often substantial. Government and financial institutions should continue working towards offering funding options that meet business needs in terms of scope and design. The message is clear. Ambitious targets need ambitious financing. We will delve much deeper into these issues and more during the next hour and a half. I augur a productive and interesting discussion and encourage you all to contribute with our questions, ideas, and concerns. Thank you, and over to you, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tanti. That was the CEO of the Malta Business Bureau. Now, before we go to the discussion, we have the Minister responsible for Energy, Enterprise and Sustainable Development, Dr. Miriam Dalli, that prepared for us this video clip. Let's watch it together.
European Commission representatives, Head of Cabinet of Executive Vice President Timmermans, DG Ener, esteemed speakers and guests, good morning. The past few years have been challenging, but we are indeed experiencing the effects of a post-pandemic world. The energy sector, as a matter of fact, has been affected drastically. Gas and fuel prices have increased exceptionally. As a result of this, we are seeing certain supply chains being also disrupted. Some doubted that the Green Deal would survive the impact. But 2 years later, uncertainty has made way to determination. The Green Deal underpins our recovery effort, and in fact, our own €316 million recovery and resilience plan underlines this. The importance of having 54% funding focused on green economy, the fourth most ambitious plan amongst the EU member states, says a lot about our country and our commitments. The reforms and investments we are planning will help Malta become more sustainable, more resilient and more prepared for the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead with the green and digital transitions. Our plans focus on tangible initiatives, including initiatives addressing climate neutrality through improved energy efficiency, clean energy sources, a circular economy, and decarbonizing transport, among other components. The objective of the Fit for 55 package is to deliver on the targets agreed in the European climate law to fundamentally transform our economy and society into a fairer, greener, and more prosperous future. Reducing emissions is crucial if Europe wants to become the world's first climate-neutral continent by 2050 and to make the European Green Deal a reality. Whilst Malta has already been seeing a reduction in carbon emissions, which is more than 60% less compared to 2012 greenhouse gas emissions, efforts are still required to continue to keep such momentum. To reach such goal, EU countries need to reduce 90% of the emissions coming from transportation. Malta will invest €94 million to shift traffic from road to more sustainable modes and decarbonize road transport through electrification. We are indeed pushing heavily towards a switch to electric vehicles and cleaner modes of transport. Malta is one of the most ambitious countries when it comes to financial incentives. We understand the importance of having charging infrastructure to support the shift towards greener mobility. Recently, we launched a project whereby the government of Malta is strengthening its charging infrastructure, as well as launching a new mobile application to help EV owners make use of the newly installed charging infrastructure around Malta and Gozo. With a €3 million investment by 2021, 260 new charging points will be installed. By the end of the year, we are planning a total number of 362 charging points. Over the next 3 years, Malta and Gozo will have an additional 1,200 charging points. Having these measures can only help encourage people to switch to electric vehicles, a move of vital importance since EVs have no tailpipe emissions, unlike conventional vehicles with petrol or diesel engines. Malta has been one of the first EU countries that launched a national policy and regulation for publicly accessible charging infrastructure. This will enable businesses to install publicly accessible charging infrastructure around the Maltese islands, and it will further facilitate the transition to clean transport. Energy production and use account for 75% of EU emissions, so accelerating the transition to a greener energy system is crucial. Malta is also ensuring that the energy efficiency and renewable energy targets are met. In the past year, a significant amount of work has been carried out to ensure that as a government we push in this direction. We currently have a total of 51 megawatt renewable capacity available in terms of capacity allocation of renewables, which is equivalent to the electricity consumed by 18,600 households per annum. Malta has one of the most ambitious feed and tariff rates within the European Union, and this is because the government strongly believes that renewable energy systems is one of the main key attributes towards decarbonisation. To date, our national renewable energy system share has been achieved and exceeded. However, as a government, we are aiming for higher targets. Substantial progress has been already made in recent years in diversifying the energy mix, such as the new generation plant and the introduction of the interconnector to mainland Europe. This upgrade in the energy infrastructure, including switching electricity production from oil to natural gas, resulted in a reduction of 60% in greenhouse gas emissions. With this come lower tariffs, health benefits, better security of supply, and greater competitiveness for the national economy. Recently, the government just launched its commitment towards implementing a second 200 megawatt interconnector, which may also operate in a bi-directional mode. The project investment is that of €170 million and will help cut emissions from the energy sector by 58%. We are also looking into clean technologies, where Europe is leading, and this includes offshore renewable technology, as well as the potential of green hydrogen and its potential and readiness for our islands. Such commitments come at a price. Now, given the current market situation, rising prices of energy and commodities, the disruption in supply chains, and shortage of goods make it even more challenging to achieve higher commitments, whilst ensuring stable energy prices for our citizens. Now, whilst remaining realistic, we must practice this in the framework of the Green Deal. Recent developments are an urgent wake-up call to start approaching green policies critically and rationally, while promoting changes gradually and in such a way that is economically, politically, and socially sustainable. As a Minister for Energy, Enterprise and Sustainable Development, together with my team, we will remain fully committed to actively work hand in hand with Europe towards our goal to decarbonise our economy, and most of all, to decarbonise our continent. Thank you, and I wish you all a very fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Minister Dalli. Now, before we go to the actual discussion between our guests, I would like to remind you that whoever wants to ask a question or pass a comment, there are two ways how to do it. You either write a question in the Q&A section, or else raise your hands and we will allow you to join the floor and ask your question. In both cases, I would like to point out that it would be appreciated that you identify yourself, but also please be concise, because obviously we have time restrictions. Thank you very much. Now, let's shift to our discussion. As I said earlier, we have three guests. We're going to discuss with them all that we've heard, and I also have a number of questions to ask them. And I would like to start my first question, and I would address this question to Diederik Samson, who is the head of cabinet of the European Commission Executive Vice President of Frans Timmermans. Good morning, Diederik. I don't know if you can hear me.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. My first question to you is, I would like you to give us a snapshot, an overview of what the EU is proposing and what are the main objectives.
Oh, for the whole 55 or specific sectors of it. Let me jump into the most relevant ones for Malta, which is transport and built environment. We propose to decarbonize those two sectors at breakneck speed, to be frank. Those two sectors, transport, our road transport, and also our houses, our buildings, have not been contributing to climate mitigation in the last 20 years. Their emissions have only gone up, while at the same time in industry and electricity, luckily, the emissions have gone down. So we need to catch up. In order to do so, we need to move rapidly to zero emission transport. And I'm happy to see that Malta takes sort of the lead in that in terms of financial incentive programs. And we have to decarbonize the way we heat, cool, and power our houses. And for both, we have a whole set of proposals. Actually, it is the usual mix of standards. For instance, for cars, as of 2035, every car that is put on the road in Europe, including Malta, has to be zero emission. And for houses, we have the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which sets new standards for insulating a house, for the energy performance of a house. And at the same time, we will introduce an emission trading system for the fuels that we use to heat our houses and to drive our cars. For Malta, that the first is not that relevant because you don't heat your houses with gas, but for cars, it is very relevant. So what we will see in the near future is gasoline prices going up a little or a bit more than a little, and at the same time, zero emission cars becoming more efficient and with financial incentives by the government, more affordable for people to drive them. And what I hope will happen in the next 5 to 10 years is that a country like Malta becomes one of the examples of how fast you can transit a whole part of your economy, in this case, cars or other vehicles. And I have high hopes that might be successful. You over there in the Mediterranean, have all the circumstances to make this a success. So let's make it a success.
From what Diedrich just said about Malta's ambition, I would like to address this question to Patrick Spiteri-Staines, who's with us and is representing the Malta Chamber of Commerce. Good morning, Patrick. My question to you is, the Fit for 55 package proposes to increase the share of renewable energy in the EU to 40% of financial consumption. Obviously, Malta's target is naturally lower than this, and it is about approximately 11.5. Do you think the EU and Malta are ambitious enough when it comes to renewable energy, also because you yourself have been working in this industry for a number of years?
Well, yes, the EU targets are ambitious, but I believe they're attainable. Malta's target of 11.5% is lower, and this is a result of our size, which gives us restrictions to the amount of area we have available for photovoltaics. However, I believe that with innovative technologies and new developments that are happening in the sector, Malta can aim to hit above this current target. We have the possibility of energy from the sea, which is something which is slowly developing, is not yet quite on the market, but Malta could be a major player in this sector because we have a lot of sea area compared to our land area, and this could be in the future a very good source of renewables for us. Another point I'd like to mention is that here I would like to say that Malta should not just be following what the EU is driving solely for the carbon neutrality, but also because sustainability as an island, which depends for all its fuel from mainland Europe and its energy to some extent, also puts us in a very precarious position, because anytime there are major hikes in the prices of energy, Malta, with its small amount of renewables, is going to feel the pinch. If we manage to attain in the future much higher levels of energy from renewables, then we become more independent and we're less susceptible to changes in Europe, changes in energy, changes in the energy costs. And this makes us more sustainable as an island, sustainable as an economy. To date, we depend solely both on fossil fuels that are imported and energy imported through the interconnector. 11% of renewables is not sufficient to give us this peace of mind. So I believe we need to be a bit more ambitious here as an island. And at the end of the day, we will be the people who benefit the most from it, because if we decouple Malta's needs for energy or our energy supply from the situation in Europe, we will be a lot more sustainable as an island.
Thank you, Patrick. From what Patrick said and from what even Diederik said, I would like now to introduce my third guest, who is Professor Simone Borch, who is the Maltese ambassador for climate change. And I would like to ask her, good morning, first of all, Professor Borch.
Good morning.
We've heard even the minister saying some of the targets and even what is Malta so far doing to achieve this. However, it seems that the perception out there is that Malta might be looking at this challenge piecemeal rather than holistically. Is this perception correct?
Well, I would say that the perception is there perhaps because we haven't explained matters so thoroughly. I would not say it is the case because, as we have heard, there are a number of initiatives going on. In certain areas, Malta is leading in terms of the financial package, for example, to assist consumers in buying electric cars, in the feed-in tariffs. Malta has always led as well in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of energy generation through the phasing out of coal before 1990s. We still have countries in Europe, and in fact, as you have possibly followed at COP26, the emphasis was on the phasing out of coal, and we have really gone a long way from that situation in Malta. So our energy generation, our power generation is, compared to other countries, already at a very energy efficient level because we rely on gas. Preferably, as the speakers before me have said, our reliance on renewables will make us even less reliant on fossil fuels. And my dream is to eventually become totally reliant on renewable energy, because it can only provide us with the potential to have the energy security, to have clean energy, and to be leaders as a small island state in becoming self-sufficient in this manner. But obviously, this will depend on technology. It will depend also on a number of other infrastructural issues. But the potential is there, and we are looking into it. With respect to other areas, yes, we have in fact found the situation with transport as at the moment is particularly urgent to address, because the use of the private car does not permit us at this point in time to meet the current energy targets, the current targets that we have. And it is very important that the general public starts to understand that the mobility shift is primarily necessary to start reducing emissions from cars. The incentives from government are there, and little by little, the public has to appreciate them and to start using them. But obviously, as we all know, the electrification of transport is also, at this point in time, quite costly in terms of a consumer buying an electric car. This is why there is such a good financial package, about 10,000 euros, if I'm not mistaken, being offered for a change, for buying a car and renouncing to a combustion engine driven one. Perhaps, therefore, at this point in time, I think we're on the right track in addressing, as the speakers before me have said, the need to address emissions from road transport in Malta at breakneck speed. We are really starting to move very fast in this respect. Now, this will also depend on the take-up. And we have to also make sure that if there are any hurdles, we will need to address them. And this is where perhaps our strong points lie, because as a small country, it is very easy for us to have stakeholder dialogue in order to be able to identify and iron out the problems that can hamper this shift to electrification of transport. Another area where we really need also to work more intensively, and this is also beginning, is the decarbonization of our buildings, energy efficiency in buildings. We have been meeting as a stakeholder dialogue even with the building and construction sector, where all the stakeholders for the building industry are represented, including the Chamber of Architects, for example, the Chamber of Commerce, the Developers Association, in order to start really intensifying decarbonization in our buildings. And Malta, being a services-based economy, the decarbonization of our buildings will make a great difference, because our emissions are mainly coming from transport, road transport, and buildings themselves. We do not have the heavy industry. So once we tackle these two sectors, I think we will be tackling our emissions very seriously, and hopefully make a change even in these two sectors.
Thank you, Simone, for that. Obviously, we will continue elaborating on what you just said. However, I have a question from architect David Schwierep, who is also, if I'm not mistaken, the chairperson of OHSA, who would like to comment as well about this discussion so far. Yes, I was right. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. Thank you for inviting me, and well done for organizing this event. Thank you to MBB, Chamber of Commerce, of course, and our great ambassador, Professor Simone Borch, who works tirelessly exactly in this area, and I have to appreciate that. I don't want to take a lot of time. I just want to add another angle to what has already been said very well by the previous panelists, and that is that besides what a country can do at the level of utilizing national funds and developing new policies, there's certainly another angle which I feel cannot be ignored, and that is the leadership that business can take in this transition towards decarbonization. Decarbonization is seen by many as a toll, as a risk, also as an expense potentially. But frankly, from where I sit, I see decarbonization as a true and serious opportunity, not only for a continent such as Europe, not only for a country such as Malta, but frankly, for each and every one of our small, medium, or large businesses in Malta. I say this with conviction because if we realize what the end point is going to be early enough, and now this is the trick, then we are able to make the changes we need to make in our energy, transport, building, and all those other things that affect the decarbonization measurement of our economy at the right time, in the right way, in also, I would dare say, the cheaper way, the more cost-effective manner. And I have been maybe promoting and making the suggestion, together with Professor Borch, of course, who's here with us, in motivating our business community to measure its starting position. We know what zero looks like. Zero is zero. It's an absolute number. But the starting position is rather unknown and needs to be known as soon as possible. Frankly, if we benchmark our starting position today, then it gives businesses the opportunity to understand where the real opportunities sit within the business lines, the value chain, and more importantly, scopes 1, 2, and 3 forms of transition. But more importantly, would enable a general transition of economic efficiency and competitiveness, which will be unprecedented. So really and truly, whilst I believe that consumers will have a serious effect on this, and policymakers have a real opportunity and real responsibility for justice and ensuring that the governance is in its right position during transition. Business and business leaders and C-suite leaders in all business organizations have this great responsibility, I dare say, to their shareholders to measure where they start and therefore being able to plan a transition for the next 8 years to 2030 and 28 years to 2050 in a manner that is appropriate, that is right, that frankly adds value to shareholders and to business growth. And in my mind, if we do that, then everything else that we try to do as a country just flows because, as we say, wind is blowing straight into our sails. So I really augur for business leaders and the C-suite leaders in our businesses to take heed of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I would like to address this question after I've heard the three panelists to Diedrich again, because obviously energy, as we all know, as we've all been experiencing for the past, I would say 40 years, energy is not only an environmental issue, has been an environmental issue, but also a political one. And how is the EU going to balance this discussion with those countries that till today supply non-renewable energy?
Yes, we are actually experiencing that right now. And the fact that we are so dependent on foreign gas and foreign oil, and with the current price spikes, we might regret that. The reality is, if we had started the Green Deal 15 years ago, we would not be in this situation right now.
Yeah.
Because we would be less dependent on that gas and oil from foreign suppliers. We would be much more reliant on our own energy. And let's take again Malta as an example. It was already mentioned. If you want to power Malta with your own energy, you can. Not only from the land, obviously, but also from the sea. And that's where new developments are very promising. Offshore wind, offshore solar even. In both cases, they need to be floating offshore wind and floating offshore solar, which is much more difficult than the current technology of offshore wind that you pile into the seabed. But it's happening at fast speed. And indeed, Malta could be the example, the beacon for parts of Europe in which that technology is needed. I'm looking forward to seeing those plans. And if they materialize, I do think that the current target for Malta, 11.3%, is actually easy to meet and should be overshot maybe by a factor of 2 or even 3. That's where fast development can go to. If we make the investments, the EU stands ready to help with those investments, also with the technology. If Malta takes the initiative, we can have a bright future together there.
I'd like to ask a question to Patrick. Patrick, after you've heard what Professor Simon said and also what now Diedrich just said about the political and the targets of the EU, do you think that this is going to create a burden on the business sector, or the business sector is ready for the challenge?
Well, it can be perceived to be a burden, but in reality it is not. It's an opportunity. I think I will agree also with what David said here. Local businesses need to see this as an opportunity for them to focus on areas which in the past have not been properly maybe addressed, in becoming more energy efficient And that means cutting out waste, cutting out losses, cutting out areas or processes or equipment which is not working in an efficient manner. Now, increasing your efficiency in business is a good thing. So it cuts down your running costs, it makes your profitability better, it makes you more sustainable economically. So here I see a win-win situation. Those businesses which embark on this journey, I believe that they will be the businesses which survive long term. They will be the businesses which have more resilience to the environment around us. And as has been mentioned earlier, Malta has as an island state, we are very dependent on outside influences. A lot of our materials are imported, our energy is imported. So we have to reduce that effect and work towards our businesses being more economically sustainable. And as a result, this will reduce the effects of the harmful effects on the environment, making the businesses and Malta as a country with lower carbon production, with lower carbon use, lower carbon footprint, all contributing to the national targets, the European targets, and affecting the environment, which, after all, is where we all live. We all work and play within our environment, which we hope to see improvements. So I see this as a win-win all around. It is true, it involves a change in mentality, and also there is an increasing amount of help from the authorities, from the government. I'm not saying that there is enough. A lot has to be done both by local businesses and by the authorities to improve and to push companies and organizations to embark on this journey. But I believe we have started on this road, and the end result could be a benefit to all businesses and to the environment in general.
Follow-up question to what you just said. Do you envisage that certain businesses will close shop as a result of this?
Let's put it this way. There are many environmental factors, economic factors, which could result in businesses closing down. I don't believe that businesses will close down because we are embarking on a journey of higher energy efficiency and lower dependence on energy, and creating a lower carbon footprint. There are going to be hurdles to be overcome, but if one takes a negative point of view, you see them as a hurdle. If one takes an optimistic point of view, you see these as an opportunity. So I believe there are going to be as many opportunities out there for businesses to develop and for new businesses to start up. And I believe there will be more of these positive outcomes than negative.
Thank you, Patrick. Obviously, one of the main industry in Malta that has been for the past years criticized for its emissions is the maritime industry, which obviously, and however, the maritime industry is an important source as well for Malta because we obviously import everything as a country. With us today, we have Kevin Borch, who is the CEO of the Malta Maritime Forum. Good morning, Kevin. Nice to see you again. I would like to ask you my first question. The maritime industry is often portrayed as a source of high pollution. What are the views of the industry in this regard?
Yes, good morning, Rachel, and good morning to everybody on the line. As you rightly said, a lot of criticism is leveled at the maritime industry, and we often take the maritime industry for granted because we find the medicines and all our commodities on the supermarket shelves, and we forget how they actually get to Malta, being isolated in the middle of the Mediterranean. But shipping is, in fact, the most energy efficient mode of transport if you measure emissions in terms of emissions generated per ton per mile. So just to give you an example, if the carbon footprint of transporting a shoebox by sea as compared to road or to aviation is much, much smaller. And this is because of the critical mass that our industry, the maritime industry, enjoys. I mean, the maritime industry is able to transport goods in 23,000 containers on one ship at a go. So you can imagine the critical mass that generates. And I just refer to a statement made by the minister at the beginning of this webinar, where she said that we should get transport onto the most efficient modes possible. And definitely we support and encourage initiatives like this, where waterborne transport is more traffic is pushed on waterborne transport. In fact, already over 80% of goods in global trade altogether are transported by sea, and the bigger the percentage this grows, the more carbon neutral we can become as the maritime industry becomes more carbon neutral, and this will bring about growth. But the growth that the maritime industry is after is actually green growth, and it wants green growth not because of the new laws and the new enforceable international targets that we are mentioning, not because of ESG considerations, but because the maritime industry itself is a victim of the climate change consequences. So when we're talking about rising sea and air temperatures, sea levels, the frequency of maritime events like cyclones, tropical storms, etc., these are most devastating to the maritime industry. So it is the maritime industry itself that actually would like to contribute to better climate change initiatives.
So you're saying that the maritime is a victim and not a player in generating pollution? Is that what you're saying? Is nothing? So the maritime is not going to do anything with regards to green energy?
No, what I'm saying is definitely not. What I'm saying is that the maritime industry suffers the consequences of climate change. It is doing many things, and I'm going to explain. And it is doing them not because it wants to comply with new regulations. It's doing it because it's committed to improving the environment and low emissions. For example, suffice to mention that in 2021, the maritime industry broke the record for new orders of new ships, and this record was broken in August. So the change, the fleet, the pace in fleet modernization is actually taking place very, very fast. You tell me, yes, how does that affect Malta? How is it affecting Malta? In 2017, CMA CGM, which is one of the leading worldwide shipping group, contracted a Chinese shipbuilder to build 9 LNG-powered ships. The first one was commissioned towards the end of last year, the Jacques Sade. The Jacques Sade now being one of the largest, if not the largest, merchandise carrying ship, cargo carrying ship in the world. And this started to call in Malta late last year. And as a consequence to this, the Malta Freeport actually invested in 20 million in new German technology key cranes, because the cranes that it had previously could not extend so much to cater for these new massive new generation cargo ships that we are expecting to be calling into Malta in the years to come. Besides that, besides the actual reach capacity, they are also less polluting in terms of energy, they are less noise polluting, and a whole lot of technology was invested in the Freeport to avoid unnecessary movement of diesel-powered tractors, for example, on the ground, even those eventually will be made greener. The scrubbers that have been fitted on ships for quite a few years now, the exhaust cleaning system that trap the plumes from the funnel, they treat them before they are let out so that they are clean. But one thing in particular that obviously complements this is the 50 million project by Infrastructure Malta, referred to the Clean Air project, which is the shore-to-ship energy supply. So what a ship does mostly cruise liners, but eventually also ro-ro ferries that enter the Grand Harbour will be able to switch off all their onboard power generation plants, so that when they are in the harbour and within the vicinity of buildings and residences and businesses and hotels, they will not be generating any pollution at all at the harbour, because they will be plugged in to the shore supply. And like that, they can continue with their onboard services, but linked to our power stations rather than having their own power generation, which is very polluting, in fact, as you rightly said. But there are other technologies I can speak about.
Let me shift a bit the industry. So Malta has the maritime industry, but also the aviation industry, which is another source, not just in Malta, but everywhere, a pollutant source. And we have also seen a number of changes in the airline. But with me today, I have Dr. Nadia Jordamayna, who is representing the local airline, Air Malta. And first of all, good morning, Dr. Jordamayna, good morning, and thank you for joining. First of all, will Air Malta reach these targets that we've been talking, and what are the challenges that you are envisaging?
Number one, this year, together with IATA, as an IATA member airline, we undertook a resolution to go to net zero by 2050. It is not an easy feat to reach, and we have been working for a number of years on reducing our emissions. Perhaps we are not very good at marketing ourselves, but we have already changed half of our fleet, starting from 2018, from A320 Classics to A320 Neos. Each aircraft, it means a reduction of between 19 to 24% of emissions. I tell my colleagues, this is not enough. We also have done other things. We have reduced weight as much as possible on board. We have reduced a lot of paper. And our intention is now to go the next step and go completely paperless on board. We are also looking very closely at our in-flight entertainment. We are optimizing our route. We have invested in systems which give us the best route optimization. However, in this area, we also need the help of governments. There have been discussions to achieve the single European sky and have a further reduction of hopefully some 10% emissions, but negotiations have been at EU level now for 22 years, and we still have not reached there. Other things we are doing, my colleague before, Mr. Kevin Borch, mentioned the ship-to-shore supply. In the aviation, that means switching off the auxiliary power unit while on the ground to ground power unit. This has been enforced by Air Malta since at least 2010. It reduces a lot of emissions and unnecessary fuel consumption. There are several operational measures which pilots undertake. Specific training is given to pilots, and we also employ single engine taxiing as much as possible, as it reduces fuel consumption. Going forward, we have also increased the capacity of all our aircraft. We plan to have a full A320neo fleet by 2023. One must say that in this category, this aircraft will remain the best aircraft at least until 2045. Unfortunately, technology in the aviation industry is a bit slow due to the safety nature. However, there are also a lot of things being done in electric aircraft, but the best we can hope for is 19-seater aircrafts, which are not what exactly we are looking for. There is a lot ongoing also in hydrogen. our best hope at the moment is to invest in sustainable aviation fuels. There are, as we speak, there is testing ongoing for the use of 100% sustainable aviation fuel. Air Malta has already experimented the use of sustainable aviation fuel. In fact, our new latest entry was delivered using sustainable aviation fuel. The problem in this area is the price and the availability. The price costs 5 times more at least than current Jet A1 fuel. And the concern is that this might mean that the ticket prices that we have got used to will be a thing of the past unless there is the necessary support. I have had the opportunity last week to speak to one of the major sustainable aviation fuel suppliers in London, and I asked whether eventually the price will go down, and he said no. And the reason why is that with current proposed legislation, the Refuel EU Aviation, there will be an incentive for investors to invest in sustainable aviation fuels, but the producers and the suppliers will need a return on their investment. So this is why the price is not expected to go down. And this for us is a concern.
So what you're saying is it's going to remain as is, or is going to go even higher because of the technology that you are mentioning at the moment?
At least it will remain as is. And that is a problem. He suggested that perhaps the corporate travel could offset their emissions through corporate sustainable measures by investing in carbon offset schemes and offsetting the travel of their employees. But I said, listen, and what happens to those countries which depend mainly on leisure travel? The leisure travel will not pay extra for their travel. And this is where one needs to take a very hard look.
Okay. On this point, I would like to thank you very much, first of all, Dr. Jordan Mayen. And on this point, I would like to ask Diederik, because obviously on paper, everything can look nice and rosy and important, but obviously we're tackling businesses, we're just talking about consumers, etc., etc. Apart from what Dr. Jordan Mayen just said about the prices in the aviation industry, I would like to also add another one with this, with regards to prices. Because the way the market functions, such as initiatives, would normally translate into higher prices of both production as well as transportation. And as you might be aware, we depend heavily on importation. What measures is the EU taking so that the aviation industry will not be heavily affected? The maritime industry will not be heavily affected. The customer ultimately will not be heavily affected.
The honest answer is that we will all be affected. And if we don't do it right, we will be affected badly. But if we do this right, we can make this. It's clear that, for instance, for a hard to abate sectors like aviation, it's going to be a challenge indeed. I can't exclude that flying becomes a little more expensive in the near future. We have to acknowledge that flying has become awfully cheap in the last 25 years compared to the developments of the 90s. Flying is now incredibly cheap, which is a good thing for tourism, for travel, for all kinds of other things, but pretty bad for planet Earth. And we need to find a new balance. That balance is not to just go back to hugely expensive flying at the expense of countries like Malta and tourism, but that balance is to find a new equilibrium. Sustainable aviation fuels, I'm a little more optimistic than than you, Ms. Gordiana. Also for electrical flying, let's imagine only 5 years ago, if you would talk about electrical flying, people would roll their eyes, hand you the basic book of physics, look at the ceiling and declare you nuts. Now we have the first companies investing in real planes flying electric, sort of defying gravity, so to speak. These innovations can help us. These innovations cannot take the burden away of prices. And we have to find that new balance in which transportation becomes a little more expensive part of life. Energy becomes maybe a bit more expensive part of life, at least in the next decade. Food becomes a bit more expensive part of life. And here's our big challenge. For us, I think all of us in this panel, that is not a problem. For a lot of people outside of this panel not listening in, that might be or will be a problem. And that's where our social challenge comes in. And that's where redistribution, helping those people, making food affordable for them, making the new technologies affordable for them, that's the real challenge of the Green Deal, of the Fit for 55 package. And that's why we have proposed that social climate fund and other measures in order to take care that this project is a project for all and not just for the happy few.
Professor Borch, do you think that we're going to experience industries that are going to suffer as a result of these incentives? I mean, mind you, everything obviously is important, and I would be the second ambassador after you to promote climate change and save our planet. But obviously, as Diederik said, we need to look at this even holistically, in the sense that there are people that cannot afford certain situations, certain needs. What is Malta now? If you had to zoom on Malta, what is Malta going to do to safeguard all this?
Well, first of all, I think, thank you for that question, and very interesting conversation going on. In reality, I think this explains also why Malta has been criticized for having a smaller share of the target, 19%, compared to many other European states that have a 30% reduction, because it explains our realities as a small state, where there is a disproportionate economic burden to shift to decarbonization. And the European Union has understood this. Our other European member states all present their realities, because after all, packages are agreed, and one has to be completely sure that there is a level playing field for all the European Union member states. And our realities of a small island state that is isolated, where maritime and aviation are essential. There are no alternatives, like perhaps other countries on the mainland that can rely on trains and can rely on other forms of transport. These realities have to be brought out. But again, the beauty of the Green Deal is that a huge a particular principle of the Green Deal is the just transition. And this is something which Mr. Sampson has alluded to already, the financing aspect of it. And each and every country, and Malta in particular, we must make sure that no one is left behind. And in order to do this, there has to be a lot of forward planning in order to identify risks, identify the sectors that will be most vulnerable to change. This doesn't mean that we will resist change, but we would know what kind of changes need to be made, how we can ensure the level playing field for all sectors, and how to assist and focus assistance, financial assistance, to the sectors that are most vulnerable and which require most change. And there is no alternative. We have to adapt to the change. Decarbonization will happen. Malta does not exist in a vacuum. The more we resist, businesses which resist it, sectors which resist it, will end up worse off, because the change will happen. And therefore, we need the kind of forward planning. We need to identify, for example, a very important issue is identifying the required skills that we need to have, to upskill, reskill our workers, to provide the necessary expertise for a decarbonized economy, and so on and so forth. So it is the preparedness, the adaptation part, the capacity building, which must be done and is being done already, in the sense we are already discussing these issues. But Malta definitely, both at the national level, government has to ensure that no one is left behind and there is that level playing field, in partnership with the private sector, in partnership with civil society, and then within Europe and within the global community. The case of small island states like Malta, and then there are other states that are even in a developing stage, much more low income than we are, have a particular position, have a particular vulnerability, which needs to be addressed and supported.
Thank you, Simone. Patrick, obviously the business community is an important key player in this. And do you think that the businesses themselves are actually ready to regenerate themselves, to introduce new technology? And obviously, at least the prices will remain fairly the same.
Well, businesses have had a rough couple of years since COVID hit. So COVID has shown us that resilience to outside influences, some of which, like COVID, were totally unexpected, is always a good thing. And I think businesses are learning or have learned the lesson that taking action to avoid upheaval from unknown or unseen sources can only result in a continuation of the business and does not necessarily have to result in higher costs. Energy efficiency, for one, means that lowering your running costs, lowering your cost base, means you can be more effective and generate solutions or generate products which are more cost effective and therefore actually lower price rather than increasing price. So there are aspects to this which one has to look at. Evidently, there are different sectors can be hit in a different manner. Business sectors which are not very energy dependent will have less of a dependence on these kind of effects. Manufacturing, for instance, which could be in certain cases very heavily dependent, would be in a better position to put in energy efficiency aspects or energy efficiency investments in order to make their costs lower and potentially even lower prices of their product. So there are aspects to this which one can see a positive outcome. There are potentially some sectors where there could be a negative hit, but I believe that the majority of the sectors, with the resilience of the Maltese economy, the Maltese businessman is always looking to enhance and grow his participation. I believe the outcome is going to definitely be positive. There may be some very small sectors which could have a negative effect, but increasing prices, increasing costs is not something that is just only dependent on taking action with regards to low carbon footprint, but is also due to, for instance, what we mentioned earlier, increasing energy costs in Europe and even outside Europe, because as we heard and we know, even Europe is dependent on energy from outside. So this has to be seen maybe more in a long-term point of view, where our efforts to become more energy efficient, our efforts to become less reliant on outside sources of energy, but more reliant on renewable sources which are locally produced, means that we are going to be economically more sustainable and also environmentally sustainable. So I think the overall outcome is going to be positive.
Before I continue my questions, we have a question from a participant, David Abela. The question mainly is addressed to Diederik and Simone. Let me read the question. Local cargo transport is an outdated practice producing heavy pollution. How should this be tackled, and how is the EU going to tackle this? Maybe we start with the local, from ladies first. Simone, can you maybe answer that, and then I'll pass the floor to Diederik.
Good. So I would refer to, first of all, that the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, has a strategy already for decarbonizing shipping, and therefore, although sometimes it is criticized for being a bit too slow, and that it has, I think, set a deadline for decarbonization of shipping later than 2050. But it is definitely a work in progress, and there is a lot of potential to really get to the decarbonization of the shipping sector by 2050. And we hope that will happen, because there is a lot of the need to join the dots between what is happening under the climate negotiations and what happens at the IMO level. And Malta has always supported the position that shipping has to be, any action on shipping has to be global. So there is an effort to make ships more energy efficient, and there are already a number of shipping companies, major shipping companies, obviously I won't mention any by name, but real major shipping companies that have committed themselves to shift to clean fuels, hydrogen, for example, etc. So I think once the trend starts, there will be, I am not an engineer myself, but once the trend starts that major shipping companies make the shift, I think then it's a matter of time. I cannot obviously predict how this will influence prices. Definitely, there will always be that kind of concern, but the shift to greener fuels for shipping will not be the only issue affecting prices in the importation of goods. But I think there is one thing that Malta needs to really question. For example, an issue which arises often is, why do we import so much food? Why can't we try to look at the possibility of increasing the support to our farmers to have more local produce, to invest in having local produce, possibly fresh freezing it, etc., to reduce the amount of foodstuffs that we import, which is around 80%. This was an issue that was really striking during the pandemic. At one point, it was an issue of great concern. Food security is part of our critical infrastructure, but it also offers a great potential for businesses to invest in this sector, to support local farmers, to practice another aspect of the Green Deal, which is the farm to fork. And that way, we will, even as a nation, be able to sustain both aspects of the Green Deal. Obviously, we will still be dependent on the maritime sector, and we will still be dependent on the aviation sector for importation of goods. We cannot definitely produce everything ourselves. But I do think that the trend is to go to shift to a greener aviation and maritime sector, and therefore the earlier we prepare ourselves for this event, the better it will be.
Thank you. Diedrich, the floor to you regarding the local cargo transport, which is heavily polluted. He's asking Mr. Abela, how should this be tackled from a global perspective as well?
Yeah, here we are. Thank you. Or a continental perspective. First of all, when I talked about zero-emission vehicles, it was not only about personal cars. It's also about vans, and we are going to come out with a proposal to reduce the carbon emissions and also other emissions from heavy-duty vehicles. So step by step, it's not going to be 2035, but a few years later, also our vans and trucks have to be zero emission. That's the best way forward, because you create a level playing field for the industry, you create certainty for the industry, they know what they have to comply with, and you create a cleaner environment. On top of that, we have our initiatives on air quality. So whatever happens with our cars, countries are obliged to protect the air quality for their citizens. And if that is a problem, and by coincidence, I know that it is a problem at certain days or times or even weeks in Malta. The government has to do something about it, which is, as we discussed, incentivizing the take-up of electric vehicles, incentivizing more efficient transport modes, combining transport so that not all those small trucks are cramping the streets all the time. There is a lot of policy available, both on let's say European level, but also on national level. If we implement them all correctly, we can clean the air rapidly.
I know this you're sounding positive and hopefully we'll do that. But if Malta doesn't reach its targets, what will happen?
On air quality, you get an infringement. And that might not sound too heavy because you get a penalty in the end, and that might take years. That's part of our, let's say, little cumbersome governance process. But I think it's the best alternative compared to sending troops into Malta to make them comply with the rules. That's not how we deal with things in Europe. What we actually do is we count on the responsibility of the Maltese government. And if I listen to your minister, I think she can bear that responsibility.
You're basically going to check constantly, even for the people who are following this webinar. So the European Union will be checking what the country is doing, right?
Yes, in terms of our air quality, we're already doing that. It wouldn't be the first country that gets an infringement for polluting too heavy. And also, it has consequences. In countries like Germany, Belgium, and also the Netherlands, you've seen that some projects in terms of transport could not, building a road, for instance, could not be pursued because of the air quality regulation, which I can say is a good thing, because we should protect our citizens, especially the vulnerable ones who are suffering from air quality loss.
Yeah, correct. Patrick and Simone, this question would be addressed more to you. Do we think, we've heard that technology has to change, that we need to do certain infrastructural changes as well. Do you think Malta now has the right skills and the right number of numbers, as in people, human resources, to face this challenge?
Yes and no. In certain areas we do, in certain areas we're going to need help. Like we import a lot of our vegetables and food. I think we're going to have to import some know-how and technologies in areas where we are not yet that expert. The level of expertise is not so great. In areas of standard renewables, in areas of energy efficiency, here we have know-how on the island, and things are being done. Maybe areas where we would need help is technologies which even in Europe are practically still being developed. You mentioned hydrogen earlier, green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is one of the potential energy sources for the future, but there are many different ways of generating hydrogen. Some of them not green, some of them are green. Malta may need help in these areas, because even in Europe it's cutting edge technology. I mentioned earlier an area which is very close to my heart is energy from the sea. You mentioned floating wind, floating solar. I also would like to add to that subsea turbines, which would not create an aesthetic effect on the sea, will not hamper shipping, and could be a very, very good source for energy in Malta. This technology is still being developed internationally, not only in Europe. So here we need to maybe create a platform where people on the cutting edge in development, in innovation, can come here, use Malta as a stepping stone. Malta is a very small island, we all know that, but we have an enormous amount of sea. This sea is a resource which, apart from fishing and leisure craft, we don't really tap into. We should be concentrating a lot of our efforts into our biggest resource. And this is. I'd like to finish with this point. I'll hand over to Professor Borch.
Professor Borch.
Thank you. Yes, I couldn't agree more. In fact, with the potential of our maritime areas, definitely that is the future. To answer your question, Rachel, I already referred to it, that the need to identify what kind of skilling, upskilling, reskilling that we need to do with our workforce. With respect to Malta's situation, we are importers of technology in the majority of cases. And therefore we depend a lot, for example, electrification of cars, for instance, that will definitely depend upon foreign producers that we will need to wait and see what comes up. But with respect to certain technologies, I would like to congratulate, for example, the University of Malta that managed to do a lot of work in terms of floating solar already and floating wind, a lot of research. The University of Malta academics, three of Malta's university academics have won an international prize on renewable energy storage, using seawater, using compressed seawater. So the potential is there. The idea of using Malta as a test bed is something that the government is really promoting with other countries, with other industrialized countries, especially, again, to scale this kind of technology with small island states. Because we do feel that even though we are negligible emitters, really and truly, but we can do our part in providing this platform, as Patrick has rightly said before me, to diversify technology, to show the potential of possible alternatives that can make decarbonization faster.
While I have you as well on screen, obviously not next to me, I wanted to ask you this question because I'm sure that our audience would want an answer about this. As you know, last summer, Malta experienced a number of power cuts, and due obviously to the heat wave, and there were a number of reasons why as well. As we switch to renewable energy, will this problem be solved once and for all, or it will get worse or remain the same when we have heat waves and Malta is experiencing this every summer?
I would say this, you will need an engineer to answer this question rather than a lawyer. Obviously, I'll just say this, and I think Patrick would be the better person to answer it. I would just say this, that obviously energy security is fundamental. And renewable energy, unfortunately, at least at this stage, does not provide that constant security of supply. That is why you need storage, battery storage, etc. But again, technology is improving by the minute on this aspect, and Malta is really following this up. Definitely, heat waves themselves might drive us to require more energy for cooling. So it is an aspect that we have to look into, and definitely if we want to keep our emissions low, unfortunately, as temperatures will get higher, we need to identify sources of energy that are greener, even for cooling purposes. But I think Engineer Patrick Thursdays will be best placed to answer the issue of how renewable energy can actually provide a better solution than the current system for heat waves.
Patrick, thank you. Patrick.
Yes, well, there are a number of aspects here. Heat waves generate more consumption for cooling, but a lot of the power cuts that you mentioned were due not just to high consumption and lack of available generation, but problems with the distribution network. The distribution network in Malta, there is a program for its development and upgrading, but a lot more has to be done because if you can imagine that our distribution network is like a grid, and on parts of the grid you have the generation, and some of that generation is renewable generation, so PVs. PVs suffer, for instance, from lack of sunlight. So if you suddenly have a cloud passing over Malta, that drops all your renewable generation. The rest of the generation has to take up that consumption. This creates problems not only for the generation, which is planned, which has the capability to do so, but has problems with the distribution. And this is where problems occur. The distribution network, because of PVs, because of renewables, and also I will add because of electrification. Charging points have to be increased dramatically across the island, we've heard that. And the infrastructure to do so needs to be upgraded. This is where we'd like to see the authorities and the government invest more, because if we have a weak infrastructure and a weak distribution network, it's like a person with a weak backbone. You cannot move. And this is a very vital part for even businesses and put businesses' mind at rest, that these targets, these investments in the future, we can actually achieve and not have problems because the distribution network is not sufficiently upgraded to do so. So the distribution network is a key element for electrical generation across the island.
Thank you, Patrick. My last question for this webinar will go to Diederik, the last one. Maybe you can tell us telegraphically how the European Union is going to help, obviously, Malta in this particular case when it comes to funds and schemes.
Oh, that's almost impossible in a telegraphical way, because there's quite a lot of that. But let me first of all start with the beginning, when the current emission trading system, the ETS, already provides funds for Malta. Your own system, making polluters pay, creates public revenues to invest in clean technology or helping consumers deal with price hikes. And we will extend that with the new ETS that will apply to buildings and road transport. There will be a new source of revenue for Malta, again, public revenues that the Maltese government can decide to spend on clean technology or helping customers and companies deal with this transition. On top of that, we have the Modernization Fund, the Innovation Fund. The Innovation Fund, which is a big part of the current ETS revenues collected on a European level and spent towards companies that are really at the front line of innovation. And we discussed during this webinar, we discussed the sea as the potential source of energy for Malta. Offshore wind, indeed, subsea energy sources like current and tidal. That is at the front line of innovation. If I could give you a specific advice, the people from government and the business community listening into this webinar, apply for that Innovation Fund money. Make Malta the lightning beacon of new developments in terms of offshore energy production, and create that new future in which you are less reliant from mainland Europe and foreign fuel suppliers for your energy sources. The funds are available. It's time that we start using them.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the three main guests, Diederik Samson, Head of Cabinet of the European Commission Executive Vice President, Frans Timmermans, Professor Simone Borch, who is the Ambassador of Malta for Climate Change, and Patrick Spiteri-Stains, Chairperson in Energy Efficiency and Conservation Committee at the Malta Chamber of Commerce. I would also like to thank those participants who took part during this webinar, all you that joined in this morning's webinar. I remind you that this webinar was in collaboration with, was organized by the European Commission representation in Malta and the Malta Business Bureau in collaboration with the Malta Independent and the Enterprise Europe Network. I urge you all that if you didn't follow the entire webinar since we've started at around 9 o'clock, you can always go back to the Malta Independent Facebook page as well as our portal independent.com.mt, where you can actually follow at your own leisure this very interesting discussion. Thank you very much for the participation, and keep safe and have a good day.